Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Yes.
All right. Well, I know we kind of put this together at the end of last week, but I want to tell you how much we appreciate everybody on the call. I know some of your colleagues will be on the later portion of our call this afternoon, but we thought it would be really good to have a conversation with folks on the front end about what's coming up in a couple weeks. We were just talking a few minutes ago how we're excited to look forward to Monday, and by that I don't mean next Monday, but the following Monday, when all this will be done. But just to start out, I guess this is kind of where we're all at right now. I think everybody just needs to take a deep breath, breathe. We're going to be fine. I guarantee no matter what happens, we're going to be reaccredited. We'll start with that. I also say we have planned for this for many years. For the last couple of years, we've been working on things such as the planning and the QEP, getting ready for this. So I am not really concerned about where we end up at the end of the day. I'm very comfortable about where we're going to end up. And Heather's taking pictures so we can document this for prosperity. But I did want to take a few minutes to kind of walk through some best practices when you're in these meetings. The stuff that we've put together up to this point has been stellar, for my opinion, and I've been involved in a few different SACS working groups over my career. Our initial materials were great. We did have follow-up questions, I think, in 10 areas. That's actually very low in terms of the SACS world. It's well below average, and most of the 10 were pretty straightforward. I'll give you an example of one. One of them was on our board members. So SACS doesn't have many criteria where they give a specific number. That happens to be one of the areas they do. They say you have to have 5. When we sent in our paperwork, we only had 3. We now have 5, and that was our response. So they're not all quite that simple, but many of them are. So I'm pretty comfortable in those 10 areas. There's another 18 they need to come and look at when they're here on site, but these were ones that were already reviewed off site that had no issues identified. And then we had our QEP, which I think our QEP team has done an incredible job. If you have not seen the document at this point, I would certainly encourage you to do so. It is one of the best documents, honestly, that I've ever seen. I think we have a solid plan. I think we have been more collaborative than any other QEP group I've seen at an institution in terms of working not just on the plan itself, but ultimately what the idea was and how we put that together. So I'm feeling really good about the visit we're going to have next week. As they always say, though, the devil's in the details. So we want to make sure that we take the time, put all this planning that we put together and really execute next week. And the trick to that is making sure everybody's comfortable with the information they have, where that information is, and we're going to kind of give some best practices that are associated with the interview process and working with the SACS team. Let me start by saying this isn't a team that's looking at gotchas. You know, they're not trying to catch us in something, or they're not trying to show that we're negative in a specific area. The majority of the SACS team, with the exception of our SACS representative, our SACS VP who will be here, the team itself is made up of individuals just like us. And these folks literally volunteer their time for a few days to come in an institution and review the good work that they're doing. They're not trying to get us. They're just trying to make sure that we have sufficient evidence to show that we've met the criteria as we've stated. Sometimes they're just going to be curious. You know, they're going to wonder, gee, at our institution we do it this way, and you guys do it that way. You know, they may ask you just curiosity questions. You're going to get a few of those. But they want the evidence, and it's our job to provide the evidence. So in terms of everything with the exception of the QEP, they've seen all of our information. And in those 10 areas, they've had an opportunity to come back and respond to those. They had a couple questions. We responded to the questions. They're going to come and follow up in those areas. The QEP will be the first time they've seen it, and you'll see there's a few meetings on the schedule that are associated with the quality enhancement plan. So, again, before we go into some of the details, relax, take a deep breath. Everything's going to be fine. It's just managing all the work that we've done. I kind of equate this to when you're in the prepping for a big test. We've done all the work. We've put all the planning together. We've done all the studying. Really, it's just a matter now of executing. All right, so here's some tips for focus group sessions. It's a good idea to bring copies of the documents. When you got your meeting invites, you had links to the materials that were going to be discussed at that meeting. Some of us are in multiple meetings, some of us are in a single meeting. Just make sure you've had an opportunity to read through the materials. If you have questions, if you're reading through the materials potentially for the first time, hopefully that's not the case, but if you are, ask the question you might have before you get into the room with the reviewer. Operate with integrity. Always tell the truth. We don't want to make up stuff. We don't want to say things that we think might be true. We want to say what the truth is. In that same vein, make sure you answer the question that's been asked. You don't want to elaborate. I know we're quite good at St. Petersburg College about sharing all the good work that we've done. And folks that have been at conferences are always the one that are surrounded by 4 or 5 people that thought they're hearing all the wonderful things we do. This isn't a time for that. This is a time, and in fact, we've kind of connected. This is like giving a deposition at an inquiry. You answer honestly, you answer concisely, and you answer just the question being asked. If they have further questions, they'll ask them. Okay? Likewise, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. That's an acceptable response when someone asks you a question directly in this kind of accreditation environment to say, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. And we're going to have teams that are going to follow up with all the interviewing sessions. We're actually calling them sweeper teams, and that's just like a sweeper position in soccer. They're going to meet with the teams that are being interviewed. They're going to ask the folks if there was anything outstanding, and they're going to funnel that information to a team that we're going to have standing by of about 15 people the entire time SACS is here to answer questions. And that's how we're going to feed the questions to that group. They're made up of individuals from around the institution, and they're going to quickly respond to those questions so we can get the information that the SACS folks need. So it's an acceptable response to say, I don't know. If you think you know, that's probably not a good time to answer. If you know, that's perfectly acceptable to answer. But if you're unsure, let them know you're unsure. Or potentially somebody else at the table may know the answer.
And Jesse, one of the things that we were talking about in several of the on-site trainings is that sometimes you absolutely know the answer, but the last time you were involved in the situation was 5 or 6 years ago, and as many things change in the college, if you have not been involved in the situation in the last year to 18 months, my suggestion is you might not know anymore. That's the best way to describe that.
And I completely agree. If you're not 100% sure it's something that we're doing right now, and if a question comes to you, it's perfectly responsible. Look around the table, see if your colleagues can respond to it. You have teams at the table. Take advantage of the teams that you have at the table. But write the question down and say, we'll get that response for you. It's important to write down the question who asked the question to you, which person on the team, and what the question is, so we can immediately get that information back to them on what their question is. The other thing is take advantage of the people that are at the table. To me, this really is a buddy system. We've strategically designed it so there shouldn't be a situation where you're ever one-on-one with the SACS team. We've even tried to help out the drivers that are driving people back and forth to have a couple people in the car. We've done that on purpose because it's a team approach. I've been on the spot where you've had somebody ask you questions, you get nervous, and you might even have a tendency to ramble. This is a good opportunity for the person next to you to kind of give you a nudge. We've even talked about having that kind of code word, that maybe you say something like, hey, that's a good point. And the person that hears that says, whoop, I'm talking too much, or maybe I'm talking beyond what I was asked. But really take advantage of having your colleagues in the room. Look around your colleagues' eyes when you're answering. Look for clues that, potentially you may be answering more than they respond. Or again, we have a tendency at St. Petersburg College, we want to show all the good work we're doing. This isn't the time to do that. This is the time to just answer the questions that are being asked. What happens when you start answering to other things that aren't being asked is it has the potential to go sideways. They can ask any question they want, whether it's related to criteria or not. They're open to ask questions. We need to answer what their questions are. What we don't want to do is give information that they may confuse or misunderstand that ends up taking us in a different direction. We want to be clear and concise in our responses. They're prepared for the visit. They've looked over the certification information that we provided them. In the case of those 10 areas, they've looked forward to the responses that we've had. They've taken their time. They know this information. Many of them have participated in this process before. I don't know if I mentioned, they get $100 pay to do this.
For 4 institutions.
What's that?
For 4 institutions.
For 4 institutions. So they don't get a whole lot of money to do this. They do it because it's important to the profession of education that we have a good, solid accreditation process. It's really their service. Often their institutions will give them their regular salaries to participate, but they're not doing this because they make a lot of money. In fact, it's a lot of work. It's a great experience if anybody on the phone is interested in doing that. I know a few of us have had the time participating. But that said, we want to make it as we want to get them the information they need. They can quickly make decisions whether they feel we're in compliance or, unfortunately, in some cases, maybe out of compliance. Hopefully, at the end of the day, everything's in compliance, but we want to give them that information to make the decision. We want to be very respectful to them. We want to honor their time. We want to make sure it's a comfortable visit. We're doing everything in our power to make sure that visits as comfortable as we can possibly make it for them, from transportation to making sure they have all the equipment and tools and things that they need in their room and their evidence room, even making sure they have snacks and things as they're participating in this process, which at times may be very late for them. They may be up very late at night with their teams, writing up documentation as they're spending the day, and with interview after interview after interview. So please be respectful of their time.
Okay, so this is Sabrina. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working with the SACS documentation now for the past 2.5 years. And I'm going to agree with Jesse that this is probably the best SACS overall report and QEP experience that I've had. And this is my 4th time through at different institutions. So I'm certainly thankful for the teams that we have here who worked on the document. There were 127 people who wrote the original submission or wrote up the focus reports for us. And we had 51 to 54 people who worked on, faculty members who worked on the QEP. That's unheard of in most institutions. It's usually like, a group of people in a small room doing a lot of work. So that said, we do have 3 sites. The first site is our original submission site. This is where all 91 standards that they asked us to write about can be found. And we're not going to click on that one yet because we'll get there in a second. There's also a QEP site, which is at the bottom. This is all things QEP, including the document itself you can pull up as a PDF version. And then the middle one is what we've called our prep site. And this is kind of a good starting place for everybody. And before I begin getting there, I want to explain how you have been invited to sit on one of these interviews. The SACS Visiting Committee, which is made up of 7 members, it includes our VP from SACS. It includes a chair who's in charge of the committee to get all the writing done. And then there are 5 other members. One of those members was our choice. She's the reviewer of the QEP. And so 4 others that were chosen randomly from institutions across the southern schools. Their goal when they get here is to simply review whether or not what we said in our documentation is true. That's what they want to do. And like Jesse said, they do this for $100. They have to be 4 institutions over the course of 2 months. So they have given up about 16 days of their lives to travel away from their families, and about 100 more days, it seems like, or at least the rest of those 2 months to do the written reports on top of their normal job for the mass amount of $100. So all they want to know is, did you do it? Yep, sounds like you did it, and they check it off. So they're not looking for anything. When they send us their schedule, they sent us, here are the 28 standards that we need to review while we're on site, in addition to the QEP. The 10 that had questions, the 18 that they're required to. They kind of put some jointly together because when they identify who they want in the room, they were the same people. So we were able to group some of those together. But they basically came up with 30 interviews that they wanted to see about the standards themselves. Some are now grouped, some are not. And then they identify who they want in the room. We did have some leeway, and we're allowed to put in additional people. A good example of that was the admissions policies. We know that we have a college-wide admission process, but we also have specific admissions processes for health. We have specific admissions processes for public safety. So other people were added into the rooms in case there were specific questions that came up. It's not reliant on one person to know it all. And we fully believe that no one person knows it all. That's why there's, in some cases, there's like 7 or 8 people in the room who we hope will have enough knowledge to be able to answer, or look around the room and say, yep, none of us know. We'll find that answer out for you. So, Jesse, if you could click on that prep site, I'll show you what's on there. This is a nice site to get started with, mainly because it gives you some basic information. Who is the SACSCOC group? What does this accreditation process look like? Why is all this stuff important? How do I prepare? Some tips that we basically shared on this website. There's a few extras in there. What happens next? All the rest of this. Part of this, underneath how do I prepare, includes some questions that you might be able to have in your head as you are reading through the information. And it also gives you some tips on how to relate back and forth with the interviewers or the interviewer or interviewers. At this point, everybody has received a meeting invite, and in the meeting invite, it will tell you thank you. Obviously, that's number one. I know that many of you, especially our faculty members online, are sitting there facing the fact that we just lost class time for Irma, and now I'm asking you to miss some more class time for SACS. If there was a way that I could get around that, I would. But if they've specifically said, I need XYZ person in the room, unless I can find a substitute that they will approve, I really, really, really need you to be in the room. If you can at all, and I'm just going to say thank you now, because I'm not sure how else to express that, and I wish I could do something other than thank you, but thank you will have to suffice. In addition, on your email, there is a link to the actual standard that you are going to be interviewed on. I suggest everybody review that. Click on the link, review the material that's in there, consider what part of it is pertinent to you and your role at the college and how you would be answering things. And then you can kind of formulate questions that they might be able to ask that way. So for example, if I was Damon at the Health Education Center and I'm sitting in the admissions process, then I know all the stuff about health admissions is probably going to be turned to me. When you're sitting in the interview, you will have a lead person that's in that interview. Sometimes that's Dr. Cooper, sometimes that's Susan Koleric, sometimes that's Margaret Bowman from curriculum, sometimes it's Jesse. You'll kind of see that there's a lead person. That person doesn't know everything, but that person will hopefully be able to look around the room and say, so-and-so, do you happen to have a good answer if no one else jumps in? That way we're not all jumping in and talking at the exact same time. That person should be able to kind of direct the conversation in my mind, and I will be reaching out to all the leads later today. So when they talk about documentation that you might want to bring in the room, that's where a lot of that documentation you're going to find. I've given examples. You might have additional examples. You might want to use the ones that are in there. If your standard or standards are highlighted, then it will bring you to the response that we made to those 10 questions. That means that that standard was one of the ones that had a question by the offsite committee. And so you'll actually be taken to a website that's not the original submission, but the second submission. It will include a link to the original submission, and you unfortunately have to read both. You have to read the original submission so you know what all we talked about originally, and then how we, have the question that was asked, and then how we responded to the question asked.
Sabrina, can you reiterate how we get to that secondary report? I'm not clear on where to find that.
Sure, absolutely. So the link that I've given to you in your meeting request, if it is a highlighted link, it will take you to the secondary report, the response report. So let me show you for an example. So all of our focused reports, not helpful. All right, so we'll just pick the first one. So this one, This was about the governing board, the missing 2 board members. It says that you originally submitted report. So I've given you the link to this focus report for your standards. I can click on this. It will take you to the original report. This part in the italics tells you what their question was. And below it is our response to them. So you want to read our response. You want to read what the question was. And then you would want to click on the original one and see what we originally submitted.
Okay, that's helpful because I didn't understand the link you provided took us to the secondary report.
Absolutely, you got it. So you'll always have the secondary report in there. I'm just going to go back to my prep site. At the bottom of the prep site, in addition, let's say you read through it, and you read through it today or tomorrow, and you know that your meeting isn't until, I don't know, next week on Wednesday, and you're doing the governing board. We did create FAQs, 1-pagers, reminders. This is kind of like a cheat sheet for you. You can bring these up, maybe, and they'll say, here's the thing, here's what they said, we were not compliant, these are the main documents that we provided, here's the main process in case you wanted, and this is it. This is all of the most important information that could be gleaned if we combine all of the stuff that we submitted. It's like the cheat sheet information. And you have one of those for all 28.
And Sabrina, where do we find that? This is Nancy, I'm sorry. Where did you say we could find the cheat sheets?
So on the prep site,
okay.
It's at the bottom. So these are, this is the all the FAQs for the 10 that we had questions on. These are the FAQs for the other 18.
Okay, thank you. Perfect.
You're welcome. The other thing that's on this prep site are FAQs for questions for faculty and staff. I'm going to bring those up in the PowerPoint, but in case you want to get back to them and don't want to deal with the PowerPoint, they're here. It also tells you how to get to the main document, the QEP document, board rules, in case you're ever wondering where board rules were. You can kind of see the same information. And then it really tells you what's next. So after they leave us, just so you're aware, they will do an exit conference with the college community and say, here's where we think we are. There are further questions. There aren't further questions. The further questions focus on X, Y, and Z. We do have an opportunity to respond one more time. Obviously, those of us who have been involved in creating all this stuff would love to have none. No more that we have to go out and ask more people to help us write. But that would be unusual. So we are expected to probably have at least something. This is the first time anyone's read our QEP. So as amazing as the QEP is in our minds, there probably will be follow-up questions, and that would be completely normal. We get to submit those directly to SACS. They have a committee there that reviews them, and they filter their final response to the SACS committee that determines reaffirmation, and they let us know in June of 18. So we really have from October until March to submit. From March until June, they review. They let us know next June. Again, we're not expected to have any questions as to whether we will be reaffirmed. The only question is how much more do we have to write, in my mind. Any questions on any of this so far? Okay, so if I go back to the PowerPoint. So here are some typical questions that tend to be asked of staff. And this came from the one of the SACS, I don't know, PowerPoints when they have their annual meeting. They tend to ask people, what's your role? So they might go around. How does your unit support student success? Because that's what they're really looking at. What exactly do you do that supports student success? They tend to ask the question, how do you assess what you're doing? That's a pretty common thing. How do you know if you're doing good? How do you know how you want to make changes? Don't be surprised if that comes up randomly in areas that don't have to do with assessment. That the entire college is considered a process of continuous improvement. And so even though you might not be specifically involved in the college assessment report for your area, you can always talk about, well, we meet in our staff meetings, we are always talking about things that we want to make better. Some of that filters to our assessment report at a high level, but a lot of it is also localized. they're not expecting you to memorize everything that was done at the college level for your assessment report. Just the fact that you have those types of conversations will set their minds at ease. There are situations where they will ask, what kind of criteria do you look at? That's normal. Do you know your policies? They will touch base on those. And how often are you actually used by your students? These are kind of typical high-level questions, not specific to your standards, but outside of those standards. They may just be doing checkpoints. Like, oh, let me ask the questions I have to ask about admissions, but at the same time, hey, do you guys assess how you're doing with admissions? How do you tend to do that? Those are some normal types of questions that tend to play out. Any questions on those? Okay, there's also questions asked of faculty. This is a much longer list, as you can tell. It's kind of hit or miss, but I wanted to give you some ideas just to have in your head. I don't see any of these as being things that faculty members don't know off the top of your head. I hope. They do want to know that we have program learning outcomes. These are not the MLOs of your course. These are those criteria that have been identified as to the skills that students walk away when they graduate from your program. All programs at SPC do have program learning outcomes, somewhere between 5 to 8 of them. It would be helpful for you to know what yours are, for sure, if you don't. They want to know how we use those to make improvements on the program. They want to know your own MLOs. They want to know whether or not how you use your budget to meet the needs of students, your grading scale, whether you use rubrics. They may talk about how your credentials fit into the credentialing handbook, whether or not you play a role in institutional governance, whether or not you have distance education or online courses in your program, and if so, do you treat them differently than face-to-face courses when it comes to student learning? Obviously, any kind of distance education course, online learning course, they would ask, how do you get the student support services for those students? As faculty members, they would at least want you to know that that exists. What else? Your role in curriculum and planning and any kind of institutional planning. How do you feel supported? They may ask you about faculty evaluation. They may ask you about meetings with your departments. All of the basic aspects of being a faculty member who's involved within the college. I don't see anything on the list that seems odd or awkward that you wouldn't be able to answer off the top of your head, but you may want to think to yourselves, can I answer the question truthfully with integrity and at the same time not raise 1,000 other questions? It certainly is not the time to mention the fact that you hate your parking space, or that so-and-so keeps stealing your stapler. But it is the time and place to talk about all of the good things that you and your program are doing to help support students succeed. And I think we have a story unlike many others. And I'm hoping that they'll hear that from everybody in their interviews. Any questions of faculty? Okay, so I wanted to spend a few minutes walking through standards. And just so you kind of have a sense of what types of questions they might ask. I'm going to go pretty quickly. I'll stop at the end of each slide and ask if there's questions. I know that only obviously 1 or 2 or 3 will pertain specifically to you, but the others will probably want to hear those that do pertain to them, so please bear with me. All right, so the first one has to do with those big assessment, college level assessment, and it doesn't have to do with programs. Our academic program assessment had no questions, but our new ones, our academic services, administrative services, and community service. It wasn't a question with how we did it, they just couldn't find the reports. So like Jesse said, a lot of these questions that came about were very basic. We couldn't find these reports, could you give them to us? So these are the reports they couldn't find. In many cases, these people have been asked to play a part in interviews. So if you are in one of these, they're going to ask you the process. They're going to ask you about how you assess your area. They're going to ask you what kind of improvements you've made over the last few years. And then someone in the room will obviously explain why they weren't able to find the things. We're unsure. It's a public site. You just have to search. But they couldn't, so here they all are. Any questions on this one? Then we have a group of things that we call the easy fixes. Jesse talked about the governing board. Yes, now we have 5. Congratulations. We had one question on our academic program coordination, and this had to do with Robert Hudson. Bob Hudson has a 5-year professional architectural degree. It is a terminal degree. It is mentioned as such in our credentialing handbook. They were unsure what a 5-year terminal bachelor's degree meant, so we went on and on and on and on about what that is. We've shown other schools that use it. We've also given a huge, long, lengthy description of all of the other things that he brings to his position, including his work history and involvement in things all over the college. There's no question about him whatsoever. It was just a clarification on their part. We did include, and I'm including this for anyone who might be caught up in a credentialing question, we have a credentialing handbook. It is approved by multiple people. When a new faculty member comes through, it has to be approved by the dean. It has to be approved for specific documentation by a credentialing coordinator. If you have a faculty member who's being approved by portfolio, it has to be approved by Dr. Cooper, goes back to the dean for final approval, and finally goes to HR. So it could be 5 different people who look at the credentialing records before a person is processed. We do have some rules of thumb that go along with that portfolio. If you have a bachelor's degree and you want to teach courses at SPC, you have to have a minimum of 10 years of experience specific to the course that you're teaching, and then you might be considered. Or if you have, in a very limited situation, you have an associate's degree, and this is more for health-related areas. You have an associate's degree and you have 20 years of experience. We might consider you to teach a course or 2. You're only allowed to teach a course or 2, and they have to be 1,000 level courses. So those are rules of thumb that we use. They're not hard, fast rules. A good example of this that people always ask me, we have a faculty member who works at Busch Gardens, and he works with the exotic animals and the big cats. He teaches our exotic animals course. There's no one who is more qualified to teach our exotic animals course than him, and so he is credentialed by portfolio. Faculty evaluation. This was a standard that was reviewed by our SACS VP last fall. When he reviewed it at the time, he said this is supposed to be just for full-time faculty, not for part-time faculty or adjuncts. We removed everything about faculty and adjuncts, and then the off-site committee said, where's the faculty and adjuncts? So we put it back in. That wasn't hard. 3412, technology, they loved our refresh program. They love how it's part of the budget system. They love how we're doing it on an ongoing basis. They asked a question that's not an actual part of the standard. They said, how do individual programs determine the type of technology they want to use to support student success? They're right to ask that question, so they did. And so all we did was we went to all the deans of programs and asked for paragraphs. That's in our response. So if you've been asked to sit on that one, make sure you know your area and be able to speak to how you've chosen technology, how that fits in, how you request money for it. That's the process they're looking for. And then one of the other last easy ones was 383. We have our librarians, our head librarians are shared between the Gibbs campus and the Allstate campus. They didn't understand that, so we're just gonna make that real clear for them. And when they're on site, they're gonna actually visit both Allstate and St. Pete Gibbs, and they'll be able to see that for themselves. If you're coming in for faculty qualifications, we talked about that. We did have, I think we've sent in over 2,300 faculty, both adjuncts and full-time faculty over the course of 6 semesters to be reviewed. We only had 42 faculty who were tagged with questions, and then I kind of showed you the issues that were showed. International degrees was one of the biggest areas. We had related degrees, so rather than a political science degree, they had a political international relations degree. Schools that have unusual course numbering, so their graduate level courses are 101, and so we had to show them the transcripts. And then additional documentation. In some cases, these are by portfolio, but not many. But there are no questions left in my mind on these. But if you are sitting in on these, they'll ask you how you go through the faculty qualification process. Baccalaureate programs. The key to baccalaureate programs is that 25% of all courses, SSH, has to be taught by terminally degree faculty members. They requested clearer charts. So we have been very clear now. We've done fall 2016 and spring 2017. So here's a biology degree, here's a percentage, here's the credit hours. We've also given them a long list of here are all the people, here's a modality which they wanted us to identify for them, whether or not it's taught by terminally degreed person, and whether or not the status with a total percent at the bottom. We've done this for every single baccalaureate program. The other standards under review, Gen Ed, obviously the rationale, the outcomes, the people who sit in that meeting would want to know, the assessments, which are long. If you're involved in this particular assessment, they'll actually ask you to discuss how you developed those assessments, what you're learning from those assessments, etc. There were a slew of academic standards that they have to review. Faculty, SPC has identified a 55-45 ratio between full-time and part-time that it tries to maintain when we disaggregate this, faculty use across campuses, modalities, and programs. These are reviewed pretty on a semester basis by the programs as well as by Dr. Cooper, and we do comparisons to our peer institutions, and we've always fared well. Program assessment they love, but they have to come and just ask us questions about it. Program curriculum, the question that they asked about program curriculum was more along the lines of how do we determine our program curriculum, how do we develop our program curriculum. They asked to have CNI members in the room. They asked to have our UPC, Catherine Kennedy, in the room. We're not sure why, but they just probably are curious. 4.4 program length. It's a federal requirement. We have many programs that are over 60 credit hours. They asked for specifically to have deans and program directors of programs that are above 60 hours in the room, so above 70 hours they wanted. And then credit hours was the explanation of how do we determine our credit hour, how do we give students alternative ways to earn credit hours, whether it's through taking industry certifications, whether it's through Dante's, whether it's through ELP. They asked us those questions in there. Student services, this is a long one. It's about, I don't even know, 42 pages long. If you've been asked to sit in, look at those that are just in your specific area. Don't feel like you have to read them all. They do want us to know where they're offering, whether or not we offer the similar service online and for dual enrolled. They asked how we assess it. It's divided up into 4 different areas: administrative, student services, academic support, and student life and leadership. And you can kind of see some ideas of what's in each one. And we always talk about how we look at how we're doing. There's a how we're doing section on each one. So this is the longest of all of them, and I think we have about, I don't even know, maybe 11 people in that room. So to kind of divide up the work so you know what's in there. The other student services standards, admissions, financial aid, complaints, and financial aid. This is also kind of financial aid. These are just checkpoints. How do we do admissions? How do we do financial aid? What's our complaints procedures? They are supposed to be required. I don't know whether they'll do this, but they are supposed to be required to come and check where our see where we host our complaints, where we host our appeals, and where we host our grievances, and be able to look at any of them for the past few years wherever they're being held. So complaints is online, appeals is at individual campuses, grievances is at the AEAO. So if you are on this one, be prepared for them to ask you, where are they held? Can I get to them? You have to show them to me. A few last ones are college-wide. How do we pick our administrative and academic officers? This is basically the executive team, provosts, and deans. The fact that we have job descriptions and people have to meet those qualifications is pretty much the answer for that. The physical facilities, they're going to do this while they're doing the site visits. They want to make sure that we are doing what we're saying, that our deferred maintenance program is operational and working, and then how do we apply for monies from the state to improve what we're doing. Student achievement, this is all the basic information on completion, progression, retention. We use the college experience, we use the Dean's Academic Success Plan, our program assessment process, and also how we compare with other FCS Florida college system schools. Publication of policies, really catalog, handbook, website, those are the things that they're looking at. Recruitment materials, our branding, how do we get our information out to our students, and then I talked about credit hours a little bit earlier. The last thing that they're looking for is distance learning, and there's 4 different standards on distance learning. How do we authenticate the students are who they are? How do we maintain their privacy? Do we charge them anything extra to be in distance learning? And then the big one, can you go through every single standard that you wrote about, all 91, and say how it applies to distance learning? So there's a cheat sheet part of that. And that is all of the standards and the information that we prepared. Are there questions, things that we can answer for people?
Sabrina, this is Pam Smith. I would have a question to get your good guidance on what's the best way if we're sitting at the table and we discover through responses that there's a disconnect or an inconsistency, how do we recover from that?
I think that's a really good question, Pam. So I would say that just like the questions of I don't know, anything that comes up that seems to have gone different than maybe what we have written about or has gone off the rails insofar as questions that are being asked and we're not sure what they're trying to get at, if someone in that interview room can note that and get it to us, then we can bring it directly to the rapid response team and they will get all information, clarifying information, new information out to the team.
Okay.
I think it's important that the team does their homework too, because if you're sitting around that table and it's the first time you're hearing something that's written in the description, then it's kind of an awkward situation if you say, no, we don't do it that way, yet that's what we have provided to SACS.
Right.
So I think it's important that everyone around the team has a chance to review the information, understand it, as well as if questions come up, the time then is to ask the question, bring it forward to us, bring it forward to the persons that are in charge of that criteria so we get clarification. The time to discuss this versus that isn't at the table when you're there with the SACS reviewers.
Thank you.
So I think we need to talk about it in advance.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the leads that I spoke to were planning on at least reaching out to the other people in their interviews just to have like a 5-minute, maybe more than 5-minute, 30-minute conversation with them to say, hey, have you read it? Do you have questions? Are there things we need to discuss? So when I reach out to them today, I'm hoping that they're already working on planning those meetings.
Great.
This is Rebecca, and I have a question about 4.9 credit hours.
Yep.
You went so quick, I apologize if I missed it, but one of the things that doesn't always seem clear is how we calculate clinical hours for students. And I'm wondering, is that going to be part of this discussion?
I do not believe that's written in it, but I would read through that 4.9. I didn't write that. Obviously.
I did, and I didn't really see. I'm not clear about what they're looking for with credit hours.
So they want to know how the college defines credit hours specifically.
Right.
I believe the response does not include clinical hours because the board procedure doesn't have anything on clinical hours.
Right.
It also doesn't have anything about clock hours for PSAV in specifics, but I do believe we might have talked about that. I don't remember.
So you think that might be what they're going to be asking about?
They are simply there to verify those 18. Here's what you said. Is this what you do? So you don't need to bring up anything outside of what's in there.
So the meeting I'm included on for that is just to verify what we've reported.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
And insofar as 4.9, they're looking at specifically alternative ways that you are giving students credit hours. So
like ELP?
PSAV, industry cert, all of those things that we've been working on in the last few years. So that if that's what 4.9, the specific questions about 4.9 are going to come on.
Okay. All right.
Rebecca, this is Margaret. If you do get a specific question about that, we have to input things like clock hours and how that relates to credit hours. So there is a different formula for lab courses, didactic courses, internships, and clinicals, things like that. So if I can send you something, just in the event
that would be helpful. I'll take anything you can provide.
Or maybe you just bring that as a documentation that we can refer to.
Yeah.
So Sabrina, I got a question about the leads and answering questions when we're in committee. This came up actually, I thought about it last week when we were doing all those trainings, and I think this is a good place to get some clarification on it. we don't want just the leads answering the questions,
Yeah.
correct? Okay, so maybe when the leads meet with their committee team, they can self-identify experts for certain things, and then that way everybody can kind of know, all right, I'm sitting at the table, Juan's across from me, I know he's got this question. And, Sabrina's got that question, and Jesse's got that question, because we really don't want it just to be the leads talking.
Exactly. So, I mean, if I was a lead, I'm not a lead on any of this. If I was a lead, I would probably go through my standard pretty carefully, look at the people who are going to be in the room with me, and then kind of predetermine in my head all of these types of questions I want, Joe to answer, all of these types of questions I want Andy to answer, all these types of questions I want so-and-so to answer. And I'm there to answer direct questions that are asked of me, but I'm really supporting the work of my team. I'm not the expert in the room when it comes to these things, but I'm there to kind of be like, oh, Heather, I think that you probably are able to answer this because of X, Y, and Z. And then if you say, I would love to be able to answer that for you, Sabrina, but off the top of my head, I can't come up with it. Is there anyone else in the room who does have an answer? I mean, it's just a conversation.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to think of it as a complete structure where the person who's the lead is the one that you can answer. I mean, it really is a conversation,
right?
And I really want it to be a conversation. In most cases, folks know at the room who has a better sense of this or that, and often people are going to look to them when the question gets asked.
I think just clarifying that among the group, because we've got some folks that, particularly at the faculty groups, I mean, everybody should know, but maybe just sort of say, okay, this is your area, this is your area.
Yeah, what I don't want is us to finish a meeting and someone to say, I knew the answer to that, but so-and-so never looked my way, so I never responded. I mean, if you know the answer and you get clear, concise response and you're sure you know it, you can answer the question. It's a conversation. It's not it's not, I use the term, kind of a judicial hearing. It's really not. It is a conversation and it should be friendly. However, when you respond, be clear, concise, and answer just what's asked.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't want the leads to be the only ones answering in the room.
Absolutely not.
That could be, awkward in and of itself.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but I may have completely missed it. Was a note taker for each group, so making sure that there's a
When I
person.
talk to the leads, I'm going to talk about that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. What Jen is mentioning is the lead should identify, if not themselves, someone else in the room who is in charge of writing down those questions that are either unanswered, that are awkwardly answered, or misanswered, so that we can get those things clarified. So that's what we're calling a note taker. It's more of just a reporter-outer.
Yeah, and you'll have a sense if there's something they're asking that we're not adequately answering. If they've asked the question 3 times in different ways and they still kind of look a little puzzled, that's really the information we have to collect. That's what we need to understand, that there's an issue here. The example we gave is why was the UPC invited to I think it was the credit hour meeting.
The program curriculum
meeting. That makes no sense to us from a SACS perspective. Obviously, there's somebody on their side who's confused about what the UPC does. That doesn't realize that those are separate institutions, that may be in their mind thinking there's some issue potentially with us sharing curriculum or something, or having co-shared programs, which we don't. But there's something there. So we really want to understand what that is so we can answer it and provide the clarification. They're not obligated to tell us every issue they have before they leave. There's no requirement that they tell us on Thursday morning, I'm going to say, this is a problem, and I have to tell you now so you can respond to it. So it's up to us through these interview processes to collect that information. When they report out Thursday morning, and again, as Sabrina mentioned, we hope that they say we need no further reports and we're done. But if they do have things, and it's not uncommon to get a couple more things you have to respond to, we may not know about them unless the folks in the group kind of hear that, hey, there's some concern here we need to address. We want to get them everything they can so they can check the box and say we're done. We don't want to be surprised Thursday morning. And oh, by the way, when they report out Thursday morning, so let's say there's the unfortunate circumstances where they have just 2 or 3 items, we are not permitted to respond to them. So even if it's an item that we have a quick response right then to say, oh wait, you're wrong, it's really like this, we're not allowed to respond. Thursday morning, they meet with the leadership group and hopefully say they don't have any issues, but if they say I have this issue and this issue, we're not allowed to say anything. we pile them in the car and they go on the plane, and now we're responsible for addressing that at a later date. I don't want to have anything remaining at that date. I want everybody to keep their eyes open, their ears open. If there's something that seems like it's an issue, I want to flesh that out to the rapid response team. We're going to be ready to start working on it and provide a good response to show how we're in compliance. Okay? Any questions on that item?
Okay, we had two good questions that came up on the conversation piece. One, yes, I will be sending out the copies of this PowerPoint to everybody. I will also be sending out a copy of the master schedule to make sure, just in case I left someone off the master schedule who's supposed to be in your interviews, you should check my work. We did have a couple people look at it, but you just never know. The first person on each schedule is the lead for that room. So if you look at the list of people who are going to be in that room, the first person is the lead. You'll be able to figure that one out. Please feel free to contact me about anything. If you want me to come to your specific groups get together, I'm happy to do that if I'm free. I can do whatever I can, and I'm basically here to support all of you. And again, I just want to say thank you. Yep.
So, are we expected, like if we're a lead, we're expected to pull our group together prior to the interview, and is that an expectation or?
It's an option. Some
Okay.
people will feel more comfortable doing that. Some people won't matter.
It might be good at the very least just get them on a phone call. Or in some cases, we're not as concerned about the specific area, maybe say, let's meet 30 minutes before the meet and just kind of quickly talk about how we're going to do it. That's not a bad idea either. In both may be a good idea. Call them up, have a quick phone meeting, and say, hey, let's meet a little bit earlier just to get our ducks in a row before we go into the meeting.
I appreciate everyone taking the time. We're getting close to the start of the hour. Are there any questions online? All right.
All right, remember, relax, take deep breaths. This will be over before we know it. It's not a big deal. Let's just keep our eye on executing this, getting through with it. Hopefully that Thursday we have no issues and we're done and we move on to back to where we need to be, and that's focusing on our students. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.